Okay, it's recording Screencastify. You guys have the article open from the anthology, the John Smith thing. Maybe you want to also open the questions. So the questions, maybe you want to have them open in the background also. I'm going to open the two of these at the same time. Why am I going to open the two at the same time? So that I can look at the question before we read. The first question says, read the intro and bio of John Smith. What was his motivation? And what did he represent? How was he vastly different from the northern Puritan colonists? So apparently John Smith is from the South. He's not one of the Puritan guys that landed at Plymouth Rock or is up in Massachusetts, up near Boston. He landed down in Virginia, and he's different. So let's do some reading. John Smith, the first man to promote the permanent settlement of America and the first to attempt it successfully, was the English soldier and adventurer, Captain John Smith. Before he was 25 years old, he had battled in the Netherlands and Hungary, fought at sea off the African coast, and been captured and taken as a slave to Constantinople. When Smith sailed late in 1606 for America, trouble and excitement awaited him. Captured by the Indians in Virginia, he was brought to their leader Powhatan and threatened with death. He was rescued by Powhatan's daughter, Pocahontas. We've heard of her. Her real name was Matowaka, and he was made Powhatan's son. Badly burned in an explosion in 1609, he went back to England only to return to America 5 years later, this time to New England, where he explored the coasts of Maine and Massachusetts. So if we're doing the questions while we're at this, we've read part of the bio of John Smith and what's his motivation and what did he represent. We notice he's an adventurer, he's a soldier, he's an explorer. All right, we noticed that already. There's more, but wait, there's more. Smith contributed more to the settlement of America than colorful adventures. He founded Jamestown, Virginia, the first English colony. He gave New England its name. He made excellent maps that continue to be used for 200 years. And like many others, he also wrote about his experiences in the New World. His writings included the first English book in America, A True Relation of Virginia. The selection that follows comes from Smith's longest and most important work, The General History of Virginia, New England, and the Summer Isles. He partially wrote the book himself and partly compiled it from accounts by others. While describing the founding of Jamestown for readers across the Atlantic, so apparently one of the things is he wanted the people in England to know, he also encouraged them to settle in America, appealing to their sense of personal and national glory and their hope of economic advancement. He also described at length its cat-and-mouse-like relationship with the Indians, each looking for an advantage so that we sometimes had peace and war twice in a day. Oh, so another reason, I'm going back to the questions. What was his motivation? Apparently he was trying to get people to come to America and settle America. Apparently they could make money, they could get some kind of economic advancement by coming to America. And you remember, they're leaving feudal England. They're leaving England that is under the rule of a king. They're leaving England where the people who owned property held onto their property and they didn't share it with other people. They're leaving England where you couldn't get a title for yourself. You couldn't just earn it. Okay, but I'm going to keep going. But Smith's deeper intention in his general history was to clear away European myths about America to those back home who insisted on finding gold where there was none, or uncovering a route to the South Seas where none exist. He answered, I know no reason but to believe my own eyes before any man's imagination. Europeans idealized America, but he had been there. He had learned to make America thrive required not fantasies, but patience, a sense of glory, an experienced commander, and above all, hard work. Smith's encounter with America ended in disappointment. The company that sponsored his voyage to Virginia replaced him as commander, and for his efforts awarded him Smith's Isles. They consisted, he said, of barren rocks, the most overgrown with such shrubs and sharp winds that you can hardly pass them. Okay, so back to reading. What's his motivation? He wanted to get people there. He was representing the English way and making English people come and settle America for England, for national pride. He was different from the Northern Puritans because they were trying to get away from religious persecution. They were trying to return to a simpler form of religion, and they were hassled for it. So they were trying to find a place to practice their religion. Very different than trying to find a place where you could make some money. Okay, questions, comments at this point? I'm going to keep going. If we look at the next question, the general history questions, it says, find and quote some description in which Smith shows a difference between the other colonists and himself. What motives might he have had for describing himself and them in this way? Here we go. From the General History. That's the book that he wrote. In his General History, John Smith tells of the difficult early days of the Jamestown colonists after the ship had brought them departed. The supplies that the ship had left eventually gave out. Exhausted and sick, the colonists nonetheless labored to build defenses against Indian attacks. I'm not sure that Indian is the correct word anymore, but I'm going to read it because it's in the textbook. But Smith's records that, at the height of the colonists' misery, the Indians seemed to have a change of heart and even brought such plenty of their fruits and provisions as no man wanted. Smith criticizes the president of the colony for his poor judgment and indolence. Referring to himself in the third person, he tells how he gradually assumed most of the responsibility for organizing the colony. So he's going to talk junk about the president for doing a bad job and talk about himself being the one who takes responsibility. So that's one of the different differences he's going to show. Why might he paint himself in such a great light? Maybe to make himself famous, or make everyone think great about him. Okay, so now we're going to go into Smith's writing. This is the way he wrote it in the old-fashioned 1600s way of writing. Being thus left to our fortunes, it fortuned that within 10 days scarce 10 among us could either go well or stand, such extreme weakness and sickness oppressed us. And thereat none need marvel if they could consider the cause and the reason, which was this. Whilst the ship stayed, our allowance was somewhat better by a daily proportion of biscuit, which the sailors would pilfer to sell, give, or exchange with us for money, sassafras, or furs. But when they departed, there remained neither tavern, beer house, nor place of relief, but the common kettle. Had we been as free from all sins as gluttony and drunkenness, we might have been canonized for saints, but our president would never have been admitted, for he, engrossing to his private oatmeal sack, oil, aquavitae, beef, eggs, or what not, but not the kettle. So apparently they ran out of food, the ship left, they were running out of food, and the president saved some food for himself and didn't put any into the kettle. But the kettle, that indeed he allowed equally to be distributed, and that was half a pint of wheat and as much barley boiled with water for a man and a day. And this, having fried some 26 weeks in the ship's hold, contained as many worms as grains, so that we might truly call it rather so much bran than corn. Our drink was water, our lodgings, castles in the air. All right. He got barley boiled with water for a man in a day, and this, having fried some 26 weeks in the ship's hold, contained as many worms as grain, so that we might truly call it rather so much bran than a corn. Our drink was water, our lodgings, castles in the air. With this lodging and diet, our extreme toil in bearing and planting palisadoes, which I assume is some kind of fort, so strained and bruised us, in our continual labor in the extremity of the heat, had so weakened us, as were cause sufficient to have made us as miserable in our native country or in any other place in the world. Okay, so apparently they're having trouble in the New World surviving. From May to September, those that escaped lived upon sturgeon and sea crabs. 50 in this time we buried the rest, seeing the president's project to escape these. Let me pause for a second. Okay, so these guys are living on fish, sturgeon, and sea crabs. 50 in this time we buried. Oh, wow, 50 people died. The rest, seeing the president's projects to escape these miseries in our pinnacle by flight, who all this time had neither felt want nor sickness, so moved our dead spirits as we deposed him and established Ratcliffe in his place. So apparently they fired the president because he wasn't helping. But now was all our provisions spent, the sturgeon gone, all helps abandoned, each hour expecting the fury of the savages, when God, the patron of all good endeavors, in that desperate extremity, so changed the hearts of the savages that they brought us such plenty of their fruits and provisions as no man wanted. Who the heck are the savages? They're talking about the native inhabitants of America when the English got here. So that's the Native Americans or the Indians. And since they lived a different style of life, the Europeans were calling them savages. Okay, let's see. Where do we stand? Find and quote some description with Smith shows a difference between the other colonists and himself. Isn't he talking about the president not getting stuff done and how he's really responsible? What motives might he have had for describing himself and them in this way? Maybe he's trying to make himself look good for the record, for the history books. The next question is going to ask, what in John Smith's descriptions of the Indians, native inhabitants, can you find that reveal what he thought, liked, and disliked about the natives? Well, we certainly have this use of the word savages. And then we have where he says that they brought him fruit and provisions. So let's see if we can find out more stuff about the natives. And now, where some affirmed it was ill dome of the council to send forth men so badly provided, this uncontradictable reason will show them plainly they are too ill advised to nourish such ill conceits. First, the fault of our going was our own. Okay, so he's saying we went on our own, so we can't blame anybody. What could be thought fitting or necessary we had, but what we should find or want, or where we should be, we were all ignorant, and supposing to make our passage in 2 months, with victual to live, and the advantage of spring to work, we were at sea 5 months, where we both spent our victual and lost the opportunity of the time and season to plant, by the unskilful presumption of our ignorant transporters that understood not at all what they undertook. So he's blaming it all on the sailors, that it took them 5 months to get across. It should have taken them 2 months, and they should have landed in the spring and then been able to grow stuff. Such actions have ever since the world's begin been subject to such accidents, and everything of worth is found full of difficulties, but nothing so difficult as to establish a commonwealth. This is establishing a new territory for England, so far remote from men and means, and where men's minds are so untoward as neither do well themselves nor suffer others. But to proceed, the new president, and Martin, being little beloved of weak judgment in dangers, and less industry in peace, committed the management of all things to Captain Smith, who by his own example, good words, and fair promises, set some to mow, others to bind thatch, some to build houses, others to thatch them, himself always bearing the greatest task for his own share, so that in short time he provided most of them with lodgings, neglecting any for himself. Oh, he's really painting himself as being a super caring guy, hardworking, caring guy here. You could use that one to answer this question about descriptions of himself. Any questions so far? I'm going to keep moving. With a small party, Captain Smith set out to explore the Chickahominy River. During the expedition, he and his men were unexpectedly attacked by Indians, and he was taken prisoner. The manner how they used and delivers him is as followeth. The savages, having drawn from George Cassin whither Captain Smith was gone, prosecuting what opportunity, they followed him with 300 bowmen, conducted by the king of Pamunkey, who, in divisions searching the turnings of the river, found Robinson and Emery by the fireside. Those they shot full of arrows and slew. They finding the captain, as is said, that used the savage that was his guide as his shield, 3 of them being slain and divers others so galled, all the rest would not come near him. Thinking thus to have returned to his boat, regarding them as he marched more than his way, slipped up the middle of an oozy creek, and his savage with him, yet durst they not come to him till, being near dead with cold, he threw away his arms. So finally he gave up. Then, according to their composition, they drew him forth and led him to the fire, where his men were slain. Diligently they chafed his benumbed limbs. So somehow they killed everybody except for Captain Smith. He demanding for their captain, they showed him Apachankanu, king of Pamunkey, to whom he gave a round ivory double compass dial. Much they marveled at the playing of the fly in the needle, which they could see plainly, and yet not touch it because of the glass that covered them. But when he demonstrated by the globe-like jewel the roundness of the earth, the skies, the sphere of the sun, moon, and stars, so apparently he shows them some modern technology, a compass, which they didn't have. They didn't know how to make glass yet. They get amazed by this modern technology. The sun did chase the night around the world continually, the greatness of the land and the sea, the diversity of nations, the variety of complexions, and how were we to them antipodes and many other such like matters. They all stood as amazed with admiration. So he amazed the natives. Notwithstanding, within an hour after they tied him up in a tree, and as many as could stand about him prepared to shoot him. But the king, holding up the compass in his hand, they all laid down their bows and arrows, and in a triumphant manner led him to Oripax, where he was after their many kindly feasted and well used. So apparently they let him live. At last they brought him to Miranacomako, where was Powhatan, their emperor. Here more than 200 of those grim courtiers stood wondering at him, as he had been a monster, till Powhatan and his train had put themselves in their greatest braveries. Before a fire upon a seat like a bedstead, he sat covered with a great robe made of raccoon skins, and all the tails hanging by. On either hand did sit a young wench of 16 or 18 years, and along each side the house 2 rows of men, and behind them as many women, with all their heads and shoulders painted red, many of their heads bedecked with white down of birds, but everyone with something, and a great chain of white beads about their necks. At his entrance before the king, all the people gave a great shout, "Whiteside!" The queen of Appomattox was appointed to bring him water to wash his hands, and another brought him a bunch of feathers instead of a towel to dry them. Having feasted him after their best barbarous manner they could, here he is saying that they're kind of barbarous, a long consultation was held, but the conclusion was 2 great stones were brought before Powhatan. Then as many as could lay hands on him dragged him to them, and thereon laid his head, and being ready with their clubs to beat out his brains, Pocahontas, the king's dearest daughter, when no entreaty could prevail, got his head in her arms, and laid her own upon his to save him from death. Whereat the emperor was contented he should live, to make him hatchets, and her bells, beads, and copper, for they thought him as well of all occupations as themselves. For the king himself will make his own robes, shoes, bows, arrows, pots, plant, hunt, or do anything so well as the rest. 2 days after, Powhatan having disguised himself in the most fearfulest manner, he could cause Captain Smith to be brought forth to a great house in the woods, and there upon a mat by the fire to be left alone. Not long after, from behind a mat that divided the house was made the most defoulest noise. He Then a man came unto him and told him now they were friends, and presently he should go to Jamestown and send him 2 great guns and a grindstone, for which he would give him the country of Capahowosick, and forever esteem him as his son. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second and look at the questions. Descriptions of the Indians. You can find things that he liked and disliked about the natives. What violent episode does Smith say about his attitude towards violence and the colonists' attitudes at that time? You notice the way he talks about the violence, it just rolls right past it. So apparently they got used to violence. They got used to the fact that they were living in a violent time in a violent place. How might this early American experience have influenced the attitude toward violence in modern American movies and novels? Apparently this was a common experience of people coming to America, dealing with the violence, dealing with the harshness, and maybe it even got into our American psyche that we can deal with harshness, we can deal with violence, and that's why it shows up in our movies. Next question, what is Eurocentricity? And that's not answered in the writing. Eurocentricity is the idea, centricity is central. So European centricity, Eurocentricity, is thinking that Europe is the center of the universe. Everything European is good and right. Everything not European is not good and not right. So if you're from Europe, you think you're right. And you come to America and you see the natives and you think they're wrong. That's Eurocentricity. What evidence of Eurocentricity can you find in John Smith's writing? He calls them barbarous, right? How is Eurocentricity similar to attitudes of other cultures? Don't many cultures think that they're better than everyone around them? Or at least think that they're right and the other countries aren't? Does Eurocentricity still exist today? We certainly have plenty of evidence that the Anglo way of thinking is still hanging out, even as we get more and more other cultures coming to the forefront. Okay, so we are cruising along. I'm going to keep going after I pause for 1 second here. So, to Jamestown with 12 guides, Powhatan sent him. That night they quartered in the woods, he still expecting, as he had done all this time of his imprisonment, every hour to be put to one death or another for all their feasting. But Almighty God, by his divine providence, had mollified the hearts of those stern barbarians with compassion. The next morning betides they came to the fort, where Smith, having used the savages with what kindness he could, he showed Rawhunt, Powhatan's trusty servant, 2 demi-culverins and a millstone to carry to Powhatan. What's a demi-culverin? It's a type of cannon. He's going to give the natives cannons? They found them somewhat too heavy, but when they did see him discharge them, being loaded with stones among the boughs of a great tree loaded with icicles, the ice and branches came so tumbling down that the poor savages ran away half dead with fear. But at last we regained some conference with them and gave them such toys, and sent to Powhatan his women and his children such presents as he gave them in general full content. So apparently he was going to give them cannons, but he gave them toys to bring back. Now in Jamestown they were all in combustion, the strongest preparing once more to run away with the pinnace, which, what the heck is a pinnace? Doesn't say. Which, with the hazard of his life, the saker, falcon, and the musket shot, Smith forced now the 3rd time to stay or sink. Huh. Some, no better than they should be, had plotted with the president the next day to have him put to death by the Levitican law for the lives of Robinson and Emery, pretending the fault was his that led them So apparently, when he gets back to the group, they blame him for the death of some of the soldiers, but he gets out of it. But he quickly took such order with such lawyers that he laid them by the heels till he sent some of them prisoners for England. So Smith won this little battle and sent them all off to England. Now, every once in 4 or 5 days, Pocahontas with her attendants brought him so much provision that saved many of their lives that else for all this had starved with hunger. His relation of the plenty he had seen, especially at Werowocomoco, and of the state and bounty of Powhatan, which till that time was unknown, so revived their dead spirits, especially the love of Pocahontas, as all men's fear was abandoned. So apparently he saves the day, fear is gone, they know that they're going to be able to eat. Thus you may see what difficulties still crossed any good endeavor, and the good success of the business being thus brought to the very period of destruction. Yet you see by what strange means God had delivered it. So even though this is not Puritan, they still have this concept of God watching over them, and this idea that God delivered America to the Europeans. Let's go back to the questions. Where in the text can you find explanations that may be misinterpretations due to a lack of understanding of culture? Okay, so did the European guys understand the Native American ways? No, because it was different. Did the Native Americans understand the Europeans? No, because it was different. All right. Culture is, the sort of the rules and ideas that you get from the people you live with, and it could be misunderstood by people of a different culture who have different ways and rules and ways of living. Based on our study of English literature before the English settled in America, what direction did you expect American literature to take? What would be the natural progression from Beowulf to medieval to American writers? You remember Beowulf was about the solo hero who came to save the day, make a name for himself. In medieval time, they had a little more time to uh, plant and sow and write about their kings and queens, and they started establishing different tradesmen weaving wool and building cathedrals. But then once we get to America, they deal with the harshness of the American climate, the wilderness, the native inhabitants who were not always friendly, sometimes were hostile. So you would expect the writing to change also. Maybe some of that fierce American independence would start showing up. Maybe that belief that you could overcome anything would start showing up. In what ways did the structure of Southern society mirror the English traditions of feudalism, nobility, and chivalry? What was similar, and what behaviors and attitudes survived? Well, the Southern society had leaders, right, who were in charge, and everybody else was supposed to do what you were told. So Smith was trying to make himself out to be this great leader, certainly trying to show how he was like nobility and he was chivalrous, worrying about everybody else, taking care of everybody else, like a knight in shining armor. And the last question. Using something from the text, explain how well the writings of John Smith met or did not meet your expectations of the evolution of literature from England to America. So you're going to try to find something that you think is different because he wrote this in America. Look for the influence of the wilderness. Look for the influence of the difficult time they had. Look for the adventuresomeness. Look for the explorer kind of attitude. And then the last question, in what ways did the structure of Northern society break from English traditions? How might this have caused the Puritans problems back in England? Northern society, they started to establish their own farms, right? They had their own land. They started to break from English traditions because now each man was his own man. You were no longer a serf. You were no longer underneath a lord. In fact, eventually, didn't the Americans push away the influence of the English during the time of King George, and they declared independence? Okay, so that's all of them. You guys hopefully